You wake up, you brew coffee, you pick up your phone, and you see it. An avatar without eyes, text without a voice, a single post. From someone you shared your childhood with, illnesses, first kisses, and suddenly, emptiness. Not anger, not resentment, just emptiness. As if nothing connects you anymore. Only pixels and silence. You didn't argue, you didn't yell, you just saw it. And that was it. Your gut clenched, your pulse pounded in your temples. The fear center in your brain flared up, like seeing a snake, not a sibling, a snake. It wasn't you who broke. The system broke you both. 32% of Americans have already cut off family members. Not over money, not over lies, over beliefs, over a like, over silence at the right moment. Because someone didn't post what their side expected. Algorithms don't just show you content. They construct your reality. Every scroll is a brick in the wall between you and the person who sat next to you at your grandmother's funeral. Every recommended video is a knife in your shared past. You don't choose whom to hate. You are prompted, softly, imperceptibly, through fatigue from their voices, through disgust at their symbols, through physical revulsion at their avatars. You think, I'm just tired, but it's not fatigue. It's scheduled isolation. Do you know this feeling? When you see a message from a loved one, and your finger hovers over the screen, not out of fear of saying the wrong thing, but out of fear that any word will confirm you are no longer in the same world. But here's the key. It's not a war of ideas. It's a war of identities. And in it, there are no winners, only survivors. And yes, there is a way out, not through forgive and forget, but through understanding the mechanism. Through realizing what you feel is not intuition. It's a designed reaction. Like Pavlov's dog's conditioned reflex. Only instead of saliva, there are broken families. Remember this moment, because next, you'll learn how algorithms turn disagreement into enmity. How politicians sell you an enemy instead of a solution. And how your brain, craving security, chooses a tribe, even if that tribe consists of only you. But for now, stop. Remember that person, the one you've almost cut off, and ask yourself, what if they feel this coldness too? What if they also think, I can't do this anymore? Silence, enemy, choice. Sarah from Ohio didn't yell, she didn't send angry messages. She just stopped replying. Her brother was standing in the rain without a roof, and she couldn't bring herself to press answer call. Why? Because his post became more powerful than his face. Because the algorithm had already done its work. Here's how it works. You like a post about climate change, and the system notices. An hour later, it shows you a video. 5 signs your neighbor is a climate denier. A day later, a meme, vaccinated versus ignorant. A week later, you no longer see people. You see categories. Good, bad, dangerous. Algorithms don't hate. They optimize. For engagement, for anger, for your time in the app. And the angrier you get, the better for business. Internal meta-reports confirm this in 2021. Content that evokes moral disgust holds attention 40% longer. Not debate, not dialogue, disgust. And then your brother isn't your brother. He's the person who believes in microchips. He no longer asks for help. He tests your loyalty to our side. And you fail the test because you stay silent. Does this sound familiar? When you read a message, and instead of care, you feel tension in your shoulders. When a loved one's name evokes not warmth, but an internal alarm signal. It's not that you've become cruel. It's the system that has turned your connection into an ideological trap. Imagine you're sitting at the same table, but between you is an invisible wall of recommendations, reposts, hidden labels. You no longer communicate. You confirm or refute each other. Every glance is a test. Every laugh is suspicion. And one day you realize it's easier to cut them off than to risk it. But here's the crucial point. This isn't a bug. It's a feature. Algorithms don't accidentally isolate you. They build tribes, because a tribe is afraid, and fear is the best driver of attention. As early as 2023, 64% of Instagram users barely saw content from outsiders, not because they weren't looking, because it wasn't shown to them. Now look at your hands. Remember the last message you didn't reply to. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but because something inside broke. And know this, it wasn't you who broke the connection. You were broken together. The enemy isn't in the phone. The enemy is in how the phone made you see each other. Javier used to arrive at work at 7 a.m., always on time, always with coffee for the team. His calendar was filled with colleagues' birthdays, deadlines, a reminder to call his mom in Guadalajara. Then one post, one comment, 5 minutes of conversation after the office party. It's a cry for justice, he said, and that was it. The next day, his name was no longer spoken. In the chat, emptiness. During breaks, averted eyes. A week later, HR called him into the office. You're creating a toxic atmosphere. Not for his actions, not for rudeness, for his beliefs. He tried to speak, but they no longer heard Javier. They heard a position, and a position doesn't have children, doesn't call its mom, doesn't bring coffee. Does this sound familiar? When you suddenly stop seeing a person and only see a label? He's pro-vaccine. She's for cancel culture. They're on the other side. It's not that you've become cruel. It's your brain switching to survival mode. Offline, mirror neurons activate empathy. You see a tremor in their voice, tears, fatigue. Online, only text. Without tremor. Without eyes. Without a body. And then a person turns into a category. And categories don't deserve compassion. They deserve elimination. Research from the Social Neuroscience Lab at Stanford shows when you read the opinion of an ideological enemy in an app, your brain's oxytocin level drops as sharply as if you were walking down a dark alley at night and heard footsteps behind you. fear, not anger, not irritation. Specifically, fear. And here's where it gets interesting. People no longer argue, no longer explain, no longer say goodbye. They just disappear. You post something, and suddenly your aunt stops writing. Your college friend no longer replies to voice messages. Your colleague accidentally doesn't notice you in the elevator. This is called ghosting for ideology, without a fight, without a reason, just silence. According to Pew research, 41% of young Americans have already practiced such ghosting, more often than in romance. But why have beliefs become more important than people? Because politics is no longer about choice. It's about identity. Your party isn't a ballot, it's your soul. And then to say, I disagree, is like saying, you are not human. Sociologists at Princeton call this the moralization of politics. Every opinion now carries an ethical judgment. And in this world, compromise is betrayal. Dialogue is weakness. And silence is all that remains. You've done this too, not out of malice, but because there was no longer room for two worlds inside. And this is a civil war, not in the streets, in our minds. Mark and Linda wake up in the same bed. They drink coffee from identical mugs. But they look at different screens. He's watching Fox. She's watching MSNBC. And every news story wedges itself into their shared life like a splinter. For him, a riot. For her, hope. For her, science. For him, a conspiracy. 3 years of silence under one roof. Not because they fell out of love, but because they stopped seeing a person in the other. One day Linda said, "You're not the man I married anymore." Mark replied, "And you're not the woman I knew." Their home isn't a sanctuary, it's a front line, and every morning they pass by an enemy in slippers. Does this sound familiar? When you sit next to someone, but feel an abyss under the table. This isn't politics. This is DNA. You used to say, "I think differently." Today you say, "I am different." And then disagreement isn't a mistake. It's betrayal. Harvard's Identity Lab has proven almost 70% of Americans now consider party affiliation a part of their essence. In 1994, only 27%. You don't choose a side, it chooses you. And if you're good, then someone who thinks differently is bad. And you don't argue with bad people, you cut them out. And here's where it gets interesting. The more educated you are, the harsher the break. People with degrees and incomes over $150,000 are more than twice as likely to cut off family members over beliefs. Why? Because for them, ideology isn't an opinion. It's status. It's community. It's meaning. And the poor? They can't afford the luxury of purity. It's more important for them to survive than to be right. Polarization has become a privilege, and you are neck-deep in it. Look at your hands. Remember who you cut off not because of an action, but because of a word. Not out of malice, but because your identity demanded blood. But even if you didn't turn views into DNA, your brain would still declare war. The fear center in your brain doesn't differentiate a snake or a neighbor with a different flag. fMRI scans in Nature Human Behavior show the reaction to an enemy of conviction causes the same cortisol surge as a gun to your head. Even if they're smiling, even if they're your sibling. Fear, not hatred, specifically fear. And while you think you're choosing truth, the tribe chooses you. And the tribe doesn't forgive doubts. In the Wilson family, it all started with a mask. Grandma Martha said, "I'm not wearing that rag." Granddaughter Emily, a nurse, replied, "You'll kill someone." The argument lasted a week. Then silence. Then emptiness. But it wasn't about the mask. It was about the brain. Your brain. When Emily read her grandmother's words, her amygdala, the fear center, flared up like an alarm. Pupils dilated, palms sweated, heart pounded. Not from anger, from threat. Do you think this is a metaphor? No, it's an fMRI scan. On the screen, your brain. And when you read an enemy's opinion, it reacts the same way it would to a snake in the grass. Like a gun to your head. Like a fire in the house. Really, physically, biologically. Your prefrontal cortex, the reasoning part, shuts down. You stop thinking. You only feel. And what do you feel? Enemy. Does this sound familiar? You see a post from a loved one, and your body tenses. Not in your head, in your body. Your stomach clenches. Your breathing quickens. It's not that you're huffing. It's your brain sounding an alarm. You're in survival mode. 72% of Americans consider the other party a threat to national security. 72%. But how many of them personally know someone from that party? Almost no one. Their enemy is a phantom, an avatar without eyes, a quote without a face, an algorithm without a conscience. Imagine you fear someone you've never seen, and for the sake of that fear, you cut off those you loved. It's not a choice. It's a trap. And here's where it gets interesting. Fear isn't born on its own. It's contagious, like a virus. And the most contagious strain is anger, hatred, disgust. Yale University studies show negative emotions on social media spread 3 times faster than joy. One post, one comment, and the chain reaction is launched. You read it, and your brain screams, "Danger!" You don't see a person. You see a threat. And then even grandma becomes a target. You've done this too, not out of malice, but because your body has already decided they're not one of us. They're an outsider, and outsiders are dangerous. This isn't a civil war. It's a neurobiological horror. And you're not the hero. You're the victim. A victim of an ancient mechanism that evolution created to protect against lions. And now it reacts to likes, enemy, fear, choice. In the Oakland office, it all started with silence. Javier walked in with coffee in hand, said good morning. No one replied, not angry, not arguing, just turned away. His chair creaked. Lisa stood up, left. The silence became thick, like a wall. All because of one phrase, "I support Black Lives Matter, but not all methods are clear to me." One attempt at nuance, and he stopped being a person, became a signal. And signals are contagious. You didn't speak up, therefore you're against it. You didn't repost, therefore you're an enemy. You didn't condemn, therefore you're an accomplice. This isn't an accusation. It's a rule of the new reality. You are obligated to demonstrate loyalty. Every day, every like, every story. Silence isn't neutrality. Silence is a choice. Does this sound familiar? You see a post from a friend, and you freeze. You don't know what to say. And in that moment, you've already lost. Because silence sounds like a verdict. Anger spreads like a virus, not through arguments, through a tremor in the voice, through tense shoulders, through an empty chair at lunch. Neurobiologists confirm anger is 3 times more contagious than joy. Your brain doesn't wait for explanations. It reacts. Adrenaline, pupils, flight, and in the digital space, the virus doesn't stop. One post, and the chain reaction is launched. Your like isn't an opinion. It's a vaccination against expulsion. Your repost isn't support. It's a ticket to the tribe. And if you don't share, you're cut off. Without words, without a fight. You just disappear. 32% of Americans have already done this. Not with strangers, with family, with those who knew them since childhood, with those who held their hand at funerals, and all because of silence. You've done this too, not out of malice, but because you were afraid, if I say the wrong thing, I'll be erased. And if I stay silent, they'll think I betrayed them. No way out. Only the illusion of choice. Silence, virus, verdict. And here's where it gets interesting. In the past, to understand who was right, you listened to scientists, journalists, teachers. Today, those voices are silent, or no one hears them, because trust is also a casualty of this war. And without trust, only the tribe remains. And fear. In a home in Arizona, Grandpa Mike makes pancakes every Sunday. Golden, smoky, with maple syrup dripping down the side of the plate. They used to laugh at this table, argued about baseball, told stories about climbing on the roof as kids. Now, silence. The scraping of forks, tense shoulders. His grandson, a biology student, once asked, "Grandpa, do you really believe the earth is flat?" Mike didn't turn around. He kept pouring batter onto the griddle. "I believe those who don't lie." The grandson pulled out his phone, showed satellite images, videos from the ISS, logic, facts. Grandpa shook his head. "Your scientists are servants of the system." Mom squeezed her cup until her knuckles turned white. Grandma went to the kitchen, as if from a fire no one else saw, because there was no one left that everyone believed in equally. Not school, not church, not National Geographic. Every source is now colored, red, or blue. And if you don't share the same color, you have no common language. even over pancakes. Does this sound familiar? When you try to explain, and they answer you not with an argument, but with a look that says, "You're no longer one of us." In the past, America had neutral arbiters, newspapers, scientists, the church, the Centers for Disease Control. Not everyone liked them, but everyone heard them. Today, trust in media has fallen from 53% to 29%. Not because they started lying more, but because everyone was given a reason to doubt. Elitist, biased, tools of power. And so, shared reality disappeared. You no longer argue about whether a vaccine is safe. You argue about whether there is any science at all that can be trusted. And if your neighbor believes a YouTube blogger, and you believe the World Health Organization, you have no common ground. You live in parallel realities. Imagine you look at the same sky, but see different stars. One sees a constellation, another a conspiracy. And the longer you're in this, the harder it is to remember. Once you shared one map of the world. The scariest thing, science is no longer sacred. Medicine, which conquered smallpox, now tears families apart. Masks, vaccinations, even recommendations from the World Health Organization. Everything has become a signal of loyalty, not to health, to the tribe. You've done this too, not because you didn't want to understand, but because you no longer knew whose words to consider true. When common authorities disappear, civil war ceases to be a metaphor. It comes to you at dinner, at a meeting, in the bedroom, and it's not decided in Congress, but in the moment when you don't greet the person who once held your hand at your mother's funeral. Silence, division, reality. Christmas at Sarah's house in Ohio always began with the smell of ginger and the crackle of logs in the fireplace. Kids in pajamas, Grandpa's stories, Brother Mark with his loud laugh, and a bottle of Cabernet. Everything crumbled in 5 minutes. He walked in, without taking off his coat, and blurted, "I hope your husband didn't vote for those socialists." Sarah replied calmly, about schools, about the future. Mark scoffed. "They're teaching kids to hate America." The conversation plunged into an abyss. By midnight, he slammed the door. The Christmas ornaments trembled. A week later, a hurricane ripped the roof off his house. He wrote, "Please help." Sarah read it, and didn't reply. Not out of anger, but because she didn't know how to reach out to a man whose world had become alien. Even Christmas couldn't save them. The holiday that once brought them together now became a scar. Does this sound familiar? When you sit next to someone, but between you is an abyss, dug not by words, but by beliefs. Families and offices are the main theaters of this war. Here, ideas cease to be abstractions. They seep into breakfast, into coffee breaks, into the silence before bed. You can't just leave the chat. You are forced to see eyes. And in those eyes, not a brother, not a colleague, but a test. Every glance asks, "Are you with us?" Every post is a loyalty exam. Court archives and Pew Research polls don't lie after elections, protests, pandemics, divorces, firings, silent breakups sharply increase. In 2020, divorce filings soared by 34%. Not over money, not over affairs, but because one wore a mask and the other called it enslavement. One believed in justice, the other in order. And these words became a verdict. Neighbors with different flags, that's conflict. But spouses living in the same house, but in different realities, that's slow strangulation. Constant presence doesn't bring people closer. It grinds at the wound like sandpaper. And then even love couldn't withstand it. You've done this too. Not because you stopped loving, but because your brain chose a tribe and exited the dialogue. Look at your hands. Remember the last holiday where you stayed silent to avoid arguing, where laughter sounded false, where you were already saying goodbye, but hadn't yet left. It's not that you became strangers. You were made strangers, on schedule, by algorithm, by fear. Even love couldn't withstand it. All the mechanisms we've discussed don't work in isolation. They are woven into a single machine of destruction. Social media algorithms feed you content that incites fear. Internal meta-reports show that extreme posts receive 63% more engagement. Anger is 3 times more contagious than joy. Politics becomes DNA, and then compromise seems like betrayal. Your brain seeks confirmation of its fears, not truth. And when common authorities disappear, science, church, newspapers, you are left with no language. Only glances, only labels, only silence. A neighbor turns into an enemy, a sibling into a traitor, a colleague into a stranger, without a single shot fired. Because civil war today is a war in our heads. It doesn't require an army. It only requires one thing: that you stop seeing the other person as human. But there are other endings. Sarah from Ohio one morning wrote to her brother, "I'm sorry I didn't reply. I don't know what you believe, but I remember how you taught me to ride a bike and didn't let go of my hand until I rode by myself." He replied 3 days later. Not immediately, but he replied. They didn't agree, but they started talking, first about the weather, then about their children, and only then about what hurt. And Javier, the laid-off manager from California, got a job at a small company where he was asked in the interview, "How do you feel about disagreements?" He said, "I believe you can argue and still remain human." They hired him, not for his ideas, but for his willingness to listen. These stories are not the end of the war, but a glimmer of peace that begins not with victory, but with the recognition the other person is also human. Does this sound familiar? When you catch yourself thinking, what if they are suffering too? Yes, polarization is not a disease, it's a symptom of a crisis of meaning. We fight not because we hate, we fight because we no longer know who we are without an enemy. An enemy gives us form, says you are not this. And as long as we define ourselves through negation, dialogue is impossible. But what if we stop looking for an enemy and start looking for a person? Even if they believe in a flat earth, even if their t-shirt scares you. Because as long as you see them as a threat, you are in prison. And as long as you see them as a human, there is hope. And that hope is not about changing their views, but about not losing them as a human being. Now, your turn. Have you ever ended a relationship over politics? Yes or no? Write in the comments. Not for debate, but to understand you are not alone. And perhaps that realization is the first step back to each other. War begins alone, but ends only together.